is our session on supply chain challenges and opportunities. I'm Hank Schultz. I'm the senior editor of Natural Products Insider. That's the media brand that's associated with the show. We have a website and newsletters. I'd recommend you go check those out. We put out information every day on the industry. And we also help run the show here. So today we have three experts here, but first, before we do that, we're going to do a few announcements here. This is the registration and badge pickup. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. The Wi-Fi password is there. The expo hall is closing a little bit earlier today since the last day of the show, closing at 3:30. There's a headshot lounge if you guys haven't checked it out, where you can get a professional headshot taken on our bill. There's a networking reception going on as well. And there is a speed networking session happening at the Supply Chain Connect Hub, or excuse me, the SupplySide Connect Hub, which is in the back of the show hall. We are also using, if you haven't been in one of these sessions yet at the show, we are using a little new bit of technology called VVox, which helps us connect better with our audience. This is the QR code. So if you scan that QR code, you can sign in to this app. And that's where we will be doing a few questions for the audience to get a feel for where people are at in terms of their understanding of this situation. And so here's our first question. So if you'd all check in with that. Are you more concerned about the shipping of dietary ingredients now than you were 3 years ago? So this is one of the things we're going to be talking about. You know, at one point, supply chain was all about, can we actually even get the stuff, as opposed to, you know, ship it from point A to point B with chains showing up. So I guess one person or two have said about the same. Which I think is about where we've been landing with our reporting on the industry. It seems like, you know, there were some big disconnects, and they seem to have smoothed out now. This is the second question. Are you more concerned about the availability of supplement ingredients now than you were 3 years ago? So I guess that sort of mirrors what we've been reporting on as well, that there are still some significant concerns out there, but not maybe quite as many as there were 2 years ago. And then when you think about the availability and pricing of dietary supplement ingredients, what concerns you the most? So this one about sudden spikes in demand, this is some of the reporting that I did earlier, and others have reported on as well. It had to do, the one big issue, there have been others, but the one big issue had to do with this craze that was going around on social media about berberine being the nature's Ozempic. And people were sharing this, you know, people who were influencers who maybe didn't have much in the way of qualifications in terms of giving out nutritional advice. And the supply, the demand for that ingredient spiked more than tenfold overnight. And it's kind of like what used to happen. We used to talk about the Dr. Oz effect when that television show was still a thing. It's similar, but it occurs even faster now than it used to happen with the Dr. Oz effect. So it's something that people have to keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to do a brief introduction for our panel. We have Amit Khan from Sabinsa, Jean Bruno, and Wilson Lau, if you'd all join me up on stage. And we're going to get a little bit more about who they are and what they do in just a minute here.
Just a reminder as well, folks, as you scan in that QR code and you see the VVox app in the middle, there's an icon with 3 buttons. You can put in Q&A questions throughout the session for all of the panelists. So we'll go back to that QR code in a few minutes once Hank gets started. There's also a brief survey. That's the 3rd button on that VVox. So if you could help us with both of those, appreciate it. All right, Hank, all yours.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a little detail I forgot, very key. So, but Ahmed, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and also a lot of people will know Sabinsa, but we always need to keep in mind there'll be people in the room who maybe are first timers or aren't familiar with your company.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ahmed Khan. I'm the Vice President of Sabinsa Corporation for Sales and Marketing. And Sabinsa Corporation is a research-oriented manufacturer of herbal extracts. We deal with the Ayurvedic extracts from India, which are clinically studied and research-based. We bring into the market research-oriented ingredients, and we have around 120 ingredients which are clinically studied. And some of the ingredients are brand leaders in their own categories. Thank you.
Then Wilson, if you could tell us, the history of your company. I understand it's, a several generation family-owned company, right?
Good morning. My name is Wilson Lau with New Herbs. We're celebrating 45 years this year, and as Hank pointed out, I am third generation in the business. Our specialty is working with farmers and wild collectors at the field level and really focus on the botanicals and the quality of them, and then transform those botanicals to different ingredients for our partners, but always working from the field up.
And then Gene, give us, your background and then also a little bit about the company you're working for these days.
So you're celebrating 45 years for your company?
Yeah.
That's great. I'm also celebrating 45 years that I've been in this industry this year. And so I've really mostly been in the science, education, and QA side of things, and formulated many, many products for many companies over the years. Now, Neutraland USA is a raw material company that specializes in mostly plant-based compounds, things like phytomelatonin, and things like plant-based vitamin D, that sort of thing, and has the distinction of recently our manufacturing arm in China. You may be aware that the FDA doesn't do a lot of visits to facilities there. In fact, you can count on one hand the number of dietary supplements facilities that have actually been visited by the FDA in China in recent years. Well, ours is one that just has been passed with flying colors, so we're very pleased about that outcome.
Thanks for that. Thanks for giving us a little bit more insight into your companies and what you do. So I would like to start off with that first question that we posited to the audience, and that was something that, if we'd done this 3 years ago, people would be talking about, where's my shipping container? Where am I going to get one? There's shipping containers sitting full and empty in Oakland, and, we can't get them either on or off the dock. So how do you all feel about the reliability of that system now if we're talking about supply chain? Are all the kinks out of the system, or is there still some things that are not back to what they were maybe in 2019?
So just from my experience, and I've had it both from the brand side, as well as from the raw material side. And what I can tell you is, compared to a few years back, when, can we find this material? Can we get it? How are we going to be able to make these products and not go out of stock? And what's going to happen? And which was a real big issue. And then if you did get it, you tried to buy a lot of it, as much as you could, and then you ended up with overstock and more than you needed because you were trying to cover your bases. And working for a raw material company who our raw materials are coming from China, I can tell you right now, we are not having any difficulties whatsoever. Everything is going smoothly. I know that's not necessarily. Are all the kinks out in industry on all of that? No, of course not. But I would say, just from my experience, it's a whole lot better than it was back in, COVID active times.
Well, I had a front view of the port situation 3 years ago living in Oakland. So I saw all the containers stack up and all that in real time. But I think the issues today are different than what they were in the past. It wasn't about shipping containers. I think customs is taking a lot longer to clear shipments because they probably are understaffed, or they're training a whole bunch of new people and using, and you'll see this move from port to port as they're training new people and bringing new staff in. So recently, we primarily do our business out of the Port of Oakland. We see a lot of inspections there. And the next port anticipate is they're going to move back east and train some new people there. So I think it'll move. And then you also have a lot of weather-induced changes that aren't necessarily related to China or India or anywhere else, but all over the world. We have low water levels, so ships can't really pass through the canals efficiently. So it's adding days in time in transit. We're getting snowstorms that are not allowing local shipments through sometimes. So it's a lot of these things that I see it more being regulatory and climate change that's impacting it versus the availability of containers. How about you?
There are many challenges from 3 years back when COVID affected. There were only shipping containers. We were talking about the supply chain, like, the shipping containers are not coming properly, or they come into the US, but they are not getting cleared. But the challenges have changed from the past 3 years or 4 years. We are looking into the challenges which we are coming ahead of us through sustainability, or the supply chain where we are affected by the drought, or lack of rainfall back in India, or there is flooding, and the geopolitical scenario has changed. Now currently, if you all know that the Suez Canal has a very limited number of ships passing through that. So how we come through that and make sure that the shipping containers are reaching the US, what will be the cost bearing for us? That is a very important factor which we have to look into for coming years. In next 2 to 3 years, this will be affecting all of us, not only India, but China, Japan, the materials which are coming from Southeast Asia, the ingredients which are coming from Middle East. So this will be the challenges which we will be looking at in the future, in next 1 to 2 years. The geopolitical scenario is already affecting a lot of companies through their supply chain. You may be seeing there is out of stock product for 3 to 4 weeks. Now it will be 8 weeks to 12 weeks. So we have to take that into consideration as well.
Before we just finish with the shipping containers, I just wanted to mention, there was this incident in Baltimore in which it closed the port of Baltimore. So I'm wondering if any of you are looking forward to, this is obviously going to put more pressure on other ports in this country, so there'll be maybe more competition for actual dock space. Do you anticipate that being an issue, or is it really too early to tell how that might affect shipments within this industry?
I would say it's a little too early to tell, but certainly it has the potential to affect it. But it's sort of looking into a crystal ball and trying to predict the future a little bit, at least from my perspective.
So another thing I wanted then, now that we've got sort of the nuts and bolts of actually getting things from point A to point B out of the way, it's already been mentioned, the next thing I want to delve into, which is this question of climate variability. There's a couple of data points that I think are quite interesting. I mean, as far as China is concerned, earlier this year they recorded the biggest temperature differential within the country it's ever been recorded. It was minus 45 degrees Celsius in one part of the country, and it was 37 degrees Celsius in another. So like an 82 degrees Celsius difference between one part of the country and another. There's also been questions with, flooding, lower wheat harvests, affecting they expect that the rice harvest is going to be affected long term. And there's been issues in India as well with questions with the reliability of the monsoon, which of course is a key element in agriculture in that country. So when you're thinking about these, I mean, first off, how do you gather data about how it's going to affect your industry? Because I know, in all 3 of your cases, you're sourcing multiple herbs. So, each one of these would be growing in a different place, would be reacting to climate changes in a different way. So how do you gather the data and even start to understand the scope of the problem?
So, climate change is affecting everything. It's certainly affecting plants, not to mention even the production of animal based materials, which my company doesn't deal with. But we saw not too long ago, we saw some significant impact on dairy-based proteins because cows didn't want to give as much milk when they were hot and uncomfortable, and it was really impacting supply chain of that. And so we see definitely the effects of climate change, the obvious ones on crop yield and all of that. And so it really, to some extent, it depends upon the crop. It depends upon the sensitivity of the crop to the climate change. In some cases, you have materials that are farmed. Other cases, you have materials that are wildcrafted. Again, it depends upon the material. Like we use a lichen, a species known as reindeer lichen, and it's in some of the pristine areas of China, but it has a pretty wide range of temperature sensitivity where it does pretty well in a range of temperatures. So on something like that, it's not as likely to be affected. But then you've got a lot of other stuff. We got a melatonin derived from St. John's wort. Obviously, St. John's wort could be affected by. So, it's hard to say, exactly what's going to happen. But, looking forward, climate change, if we don't get serious as a nation in addressing that in a more meaningful way, it's not just our industry. All industries are going to be affected significantly.
I think we have to really be focused on climate change and what we can do as an industry, country, and individually about not reaching the 2 degrees Celsius tipping point. I see it very different than probably a lot of people in this industry see it, as because we actually are at the farm level, field level, watching these things come out. So I think when you're looking at a particular phytoconstituent, you can probably get around some of these things that climate change is impacting, because you're looking for something very specific and extracting that particular molecule or chemistry. But if you come from a herbal tradition like ours, traditional Chinese medicine, where we're looking at whole herbalism, the plant is not just one particular phytochemical, it's the whole of the plant, it's the plus and balances of the plant. And we're seeing a lot of that change with temperature. But again, the other thing is there's plants that are really suffering, but also plants are very resilient in sort of ways that, just like humans are, they are now migrating north and south depending on their need for it to be colder or warmer. So even in nature is constantly adjusting, but the seasons are coming either sooner or later than traditionally have been for harvesting, and the phytochemistry is changing a little bit that we can see. It's just not as good as it used to be in the traditional harvesting regions.
The main concern for us is on the climate change, how do you relay this information to the farmers who are in the ground level? We talk about it as an industry, there is a lot of climate change happening, but we have to communicate that to the farmers because they can get involved with new agro techniques. That is very much important for Sabinsa, where we are trying to work with the farmers to incorporate new agro techniques so that the climate change doesn't affect their livelihoods. We are working with them on contract farming, where we come back to them or go back to them and tell them about new agro techniques which they can get involved with so that their harvest doesn't affect through the flooding or drought. This is very important for us because this depends, the communities depend upon the supply chain. Company as Sabinsa, who is big in cultivation, we were pioneers in cultivation in India for some of the medicinal plants, which we have been seeing that is affected by the climate change. Recently there was flooding and there was drought where the turmeric farms were affected. So we have been working with the farmers. We are going out of the country from India to looking at different parts of the world, Southeast Asia, Africa, whether this the turmeric roots can be grown in that part of the world. And we are sharing with the government of other countries, as well as the farmers, what we can do and help them to improve their agro techniques so that the supply chain is not affected.
And in the respective countries, I mean, I think there's a unity between your three operations in the sense that you're dealing with a lot of small quantities and lots of different farmers, so many smallholders and so forth. So what kind of support do you get from the relative ministries of agriculture in terms of conveying that information out to the farmers so they can deal more effectively with these challenges?
I don't really have an exceptionally good answer to that question. I can tell you that we've had a good relationship with the government in China. I can't give you too much on the specifics of that. As I understand, because of the relationship, everything's gone fairly smoothly. But, you know, with the politics of China and everything, who knows what the future will bring. So.
Well, I mean, another answer also could be that it's up then to the companies themselves to fill in these gaps. You know,
Absolutely, you're 100% right. The companies are going to have to take, step up to the extent that they can and try to fill that gap.
You know, I think every government has policies put in place that reflect their vision for their country and what goals they have. So China right now is encouraging people to move away from growing, whether it's medicinal plants or other plants. They really want to focus on being self-sufficient on the food side. So they're really encouraging some of this land to be used more for production of foodstuffs, right? And then local governments also have to push out policy and report economic activity. So certain provinces and areas are really trying to focus on certain type of herbs or plant material. Like recently, one of our partners was talking to the government about how they can grow different types of mushrooms more efficiently for the marketplace. So there's all sorts of policies, but I think the policy in China I see the most is really impacting the industry overall is the drive to produce more food for their people.
Indian government has taken a lot of initiatives in past 3 to 5 years, and it is working very closely with the private sector in India. And it has taken a lot of, there is a Ayush board, which is the part of government of India, which is working with the natural industry in India to have a lot of initiatives where they are giving subsidies to the farmers, to the private sector, to help, have the supply chain, robust supply chain from India. And they have their targets by the Indian government as well. So I think, participation of private sector with Indian government will help us in a long run.
At this point, I'd just like to remind everybody, including some people who may have come in late, if you scan this QR code, it will bring up this VVOX app. At the top of that screen in the middle, there's a little button you can click to submit questions if you have questions. We'll be getting to questions in a few minutes here.
Hey, Hank, could I add something to this last
Certainly,
part of this discussion?
please.
Just this. There's been some very good discussion about, growing herbs, growing plants, and the Chinese government and what they want for their people and self-sufficiency, and that's all a very real issue. One of the things that is sort of unique in our situation is that there's some materials that we get that are upcycled. Like, for example, we have our rice germ extract, which is for its polyamine content. Well, we use that it's a byproduct of the milling industry there. So they're milling rice, and they're taking the germ and they're taking the bran and they're tossing it in animal feed or otherwise disposing of it. So we're upcycling that. So it's something that, even though they're focusing on the use of these materials for self-sufficiency, there's still waste of that can be used and upcycled. And a similar situation happens with our newer melatonin derived from tomatoes. The way that the tomatoes are done and the way that they're used, we have materials there that are upcycled as well. So to some extent, we get around a little bit of that. Not certainly on all materials, but on some of those.
Now that we've talked about climate change and maybe dealing with some of that, we've gotten the nuts and bolts shipping questions out of the way. Of course, we do need to talk about this developing situation. It's been mentioned briefly already, the geopolitical instability. So one of the ways that the rubber really hit the road in this industry was the advent of the tariffs. So of course, former President Trump initiated a bunch of tariffs. President Biden has seen fit to continue quite a few of those. So there's UNPA, United Natural Products Alliance, earlier this year put out a list, and I think there was about 300 ingredients that are of interest in this industry that are on that list. And the tariffs are ranging from 7.5% to as much as 25% in some cases. Now, I think for a lot of the ingredients that we're dealing with in this discussion, you're talking about ingredients that might be used in the milligram quantities in a finished product. So maybe it's got less of an issue. I have heard from people on the show floor just yesterday that it's having a big effect in the protein space, because now protein you're using in gram quantities, and it really does make a big of a difference. So first off, how much of a an impetus have these tariffs put into the industry for people to start thinking about maybe we need to unwind some of our reliance on China and come up with alternatives, A, and then B, we'll talk about maybe the geopolitical tensions as a separate issue. But first, just on the matter of price, do you think that's a big driver?
Certainly, price is always a driver. But I want to comment on the latter part of your statement. Maybe we need to try to get away from some of our reliance on China and so forth. I laugh just a little bit at that idea, because if you look at China and India, conservatively, 85% of the ingredients in this industry are coming from those two countries, with the larger amount of it coming from China. I just had this conversation with Lauren Israelson at UNPA literally the other day. So yes, certainly there are some ingredients that we can do something with, but perhaps from places other than China. But that's not going to be something that's going to happen easily or quickly. That's going to be something that would take place over a period of many years. And so the bigger issue is, of course, the tariffs, and is there an impact? And yes, there is an impact. But as you stated, when you're talking about at the milligram levels, it's perhaps less than it would be at the gram levels such as protein. So, we deal with it. It'd be great if the tariffs weren't so high, but they are what they are. And so, we do our best to deal with that and make it as comfortable for the customers as we can.
Yeah, like I said, New Herbs primarily does bulk herbs, and we get tariffed at a 25% level. But what I hear is there's policies being espoused out there that could, depending on who wins the election, that the tariffs will continue to march north into an even higher level, maybe 60%-ish, maybe was heard number out there. So I think, yes, tariffs are a real thing. It will have an impact, and the impact is growing, especially as the cost of money is increasing. Used to be you put it in the bank and you get 0%, so you put it in the warehouse, 0% is 0% still. But if there's a real cost to money, and you get 5, 6, 7%, now that's compounded on top of the tariff. I think the other thing that, to Gene's point, is that production isn't just moving one factory. It's a series of inputs that go into it. So even like to make a shirt, right? It's not just the shirt, it's the fabric, it's the machines, it's the buttons, it's the zippers, all these things that go into it. And it's the same thing in our industry. It's really hard to just uplift one thing and move somewhere else even. So I think the idea that we can turn it on a dime is going to be really hard. So I think we have to figure out ways to manage the situation the best we can. And where we can move some stuff, we'll move it. But if we can't, it's going to be really hard to do that kind of switch overall.
I think the major threat from the government will be the tariff. Like, because tariffs will affect the bottom line of every company, as well as we have to pass on that tariff increase to the consumers. And sometimes a bottle of a mental health supplement may cost you $5. But with the addition of tariff and compounding the bottom line for the company, it may cost like $8 at the end of the day. And this may affect the consumer as well. With the inflation going along, it may have a big effect on the companies, the smaller companies. The larger companies may survive, but the smaller companies, the new startups, they may have a lot of effects because they have to look at their bottom lines, and the increase in tariffs will play a larger effect in their companies, and they may not be able to sustain the increase in tariffs. So I think like Lauren from UNPA has taken a very good stand on that, but we have to work as an industry collectively and put forward our thoughts to the political leaders and see how we can improve this industry as well. That will be a challenge for everybody. It's not about the India, China, or Africa countries. It is for collectively as an industry. We have to be very, very clear about that and take forward a notion to the politicians and tell them, like, hey, this is a natural industry, and keep it very much like, healthy with not putting on the tariffs.
So, this relationship that this country's had with China, it's been in sort of a certain phase for almost 50 years now, really, from the time of Deng Xiaoping and when Nixon went to China and all that. And it seems like maybe we're coming to a point where the relationship between the U.S. and China may be fundamentally altered for some time going forward. Part of that, unfortunately, seems to have been some, negative China feeling. Have any of you seen in your industry when made in China or Chinese ingredients, any of that appears on labels, is that starting to become a liability from maybe a public relations standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the whole history of this, having been around in the industry a long time.
Well, me too, which is why I mentioned.
I remember when Hoffman LaRoche had basic things, vitamin C, what have you, and everybody was buying it from them. And then China came in and low-cut the price, and they kind of went out of business. Then China upped the price. I remember that whole history of everything that took place, and then all the stuff that happened with China. And in the past, so many of the materials weren't of the quality that they should have been. And so there was sort of a deserved reputation. But that has changed so much over the years. And you can get, and what I tell people today when they ask about that is it's not so much where it comes from. It's what kind of documentation do you have? What kind of testing has been done? What is the quality of the material? Do you have third-party tests? What do you have to demonstrate that this product is what it's supposed to be, that it's the quality that it's supposed to be, that it has the compounds in it that it's supposed to have, that it's the real deal? What do you have? Are you looking at sustainability, fair trade? All of those components go into, if it's from a viable source and a sustainable source. And so that applies to China. So, I work for a company who our materials come from China. And, and so maybe I'm having a skewed view of it because everybody who comes to us knows our material is from China and they don't have a problem with it. When I talk to other people, and they have concerns about that, I explain what I explained to you. So yeah, I think there are some people who have that it has changed a great deal. And also, when you have other kinds of certifications, things like I mentioned, we had an FDA inspection we passed, everything went great. I mean, that helps too. But yeah, I think there's some people who still think that kava will be bad for your liver, despite the fact that that was all bull, and we know that otherwise. So, it's an education process, I think.
To Gene's point, the quality has improved, but I think it's one where the quality in the industry overall and the standards have improved. So, it's pushing everyone up to this even playing field. Whereas before, this person might have that standard, this person might have a standard, and it was all over the place. But I think that's sort of as the industry improves, the quality overall in the whole supply chain improves. But I think the more important thing, Hank, is that, we've been globalizing for so many years now that it seems like we're at a point where we're really questioning as a world, do we want to be a global economy, a global civilization, or do you want to be more regional, even smaller? So this is push and tug from a macro geopolitical view and policies, right? It's like, it's not only China, right? It's like, do I want to do business with India? Do I want to do business with Mexico? Or wherever it may be. And it's this push and pull going on that, let's see, what direction in the world are we going to go? Are we going to become more open and integrated as a world, or become more closed and separated? So I think that's the real question, is that it's not only a China issue. It's like China's just the tipping point, and it's just the poster child, but it's happening all across the world. And, I think as a country, we're becoming more fractured and more charged. I have a partner who works with me, and we moved production from the U.S. to China, and his neighbor stopped talking to him. So it's like, it's all over the place, right? I think, can we have these conversations and really see where we want as a society, where we want to go? Do we want to be more connected or less connected?
I think the biggest threat what we see in the industry, it's not about China, not about India, or not about any other countries, is adulteration. Coming on, looking at different ingredients, geopolitical situation, climate change, the supply chain, adulteration, and the threat from pharma industry will be a biggest challenge for our natural industry. Pharma industry, they look up to us as some business, they are not worthy of wasting our time. But we have to educate our industry, what it brings to the table, the consumers, the clinical study, the research. We have to make a inroads to the end consumer, where we are telling them, what we are spending money on clinical studies, or research on some of the ingredients. Yes, Chinese ingredients. There are some of the best ingredients with proven science. So we have to communicate to the industry or the end consumer what it brings to the table. It's not about India or China, Indian ingredients are superior or Chinese ingredients are inferior. It doesn't have that role. As an industry, as a collective, we have to take the efforts to educate the end consumer and bring, there are some bad players in the industry. We have to inform the industry, hey, these are the things, these are the challenges on adulteration. These are the challenges on using a low quality ingredient in your formulas. What will happen to the formulation or the industry as a whole? So we may have seen many of the press releases in the recent past where our industry was not shown in a good light. But whenever we have a chance, we have to inform to the end consumer. And as an industry, as a collective, we have to take the efforts to educate the consumer.
Well, I think one thing that's an advantage for this industry, and especially for the ingredients we're talking about here, is many of them are unique to the places where you're getting them from. So it's not like, I'm sourcing, Indian turmeric instead of good old American turmeric, right? There's really very little. I'm sure there's a little bit grown in this country, but not enough for it to matter. So there's that aspect that this really speaks to. I think the best things that global trade can bring to the table in terms of getting ingredients and things from overseas that those companies do well that we don't, and maybe giving something back that we're strong at in other countries. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work, right? So at this point, we're getting close to the opening up for questions from the audience. So once again, I would encourage you, if you haven't done so already, you can submit a question via the VVox You fire up that home page on the top middle button, there's one for questions. So just for me to kick it off, what keeps you up at night now as opposed to, and actually it's very similar to a question we have here. The question from the audience is, what is the mindset change in the dietary ingredients supply chain in 2024, almost the third year post-COVID? So I think that's a big wrap-up question. I mean, I guess one of the ways I might characterize it would be, what keeps you up at night now as opposed to what kept you up at night 3 years ago? Are the same things or are the new sets of concerns?
I think that there are some things that are different. One of the things we talked about earlier was climate change. I would say that even more than the political situations in different countries, more than anything else, that's what is on my mind. That's what, quote unquote, keeps me up at night. And back during the times of COVID supply chain issues, I mean, that was the thing. That was the focus. And now I just think a lot about how is climate change going to impact not just our industry, but all industries. So that's the thing more than anything else that keeps me up at night.
So, Gene, maybe I just need to get your number and we can be not sleeping all night together talking about climate change. But I think climate change is the thing that is going to be impacting us for the rest of our lives and rest of our careers, especially in this industry. I think one of the things that is how do we document the positive impacts we're making and report it is going to be a huge business in our industry because there's a lot of reporting requirements coming down in the EU and the US for publicly listed companies, and they will lean on their partners to provide some of that information. And it's also investing, right? We have a Fairwild Sazandra project coming online in northern China this year, and it's going to cost me more than the stuff that's grown per kilo. But whether we go harvest it or not, the fruit will grow. So we have this ability to take off X number of tons of grown material and reduce that carbon footprint. But how do we report that story and show the results so that our partners can then report that in their 10Ks and whatnot? So I think that's how I'm looking at it.
Hank, apart from the climate change, I'm very worried about the new NDI guidelines, the draft guidelines, which we are not very clear right now. So I'm very much concerned about how it will impact our industry in next 1 to 2 years, in a short term. But long term, yes, of course, climate change will be a very big issue for us. And we are seeing that in India right now. The North India has a different climate coming back to South. It is completely drought. We didn't had a lot of rainfall this year in the South India. And that's where we are spending sleepless nights because the harvesting season is coming up for India as well. And usually in South India, there will be 2 harvests to 3 harvests per crop. And we are seeing that the first crop is failed. The second and third crop will be, we are hoping that we have some rainfalls coming through and the climate doesn't affect much. So these are the 2 issues which are keeping me awake right now.
Well, thank you very much for having that discussion with us. I hope you all got some insight into the current supply chain situation and what these suppliers are concerned about. If we'll be around for a minute or two if you have any other questions or like to connect up with the speakers. So thanks very much. Thanks to our support team in the back, and have a great day. Also, I would mention that Ahmed mentioned the NDI question. We will have Kara Welch from FDA speaking in a couple of hours here, I think in this room. Is that right, Amanda? I'm sure that's going to be one of the questions that will be addressed in that session. So thank you all.